Viewers, before we dive in, drop a quick comment with where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I'm curious if you're tuning in at sunrise with coffee or at midnight like I was that night in my garage. Because that's where this story begins, in a quiet workshop, filled with the smell of oil and the faint clink of tools on steel. Arthur Wells sits hunched over the open hood of a '68 Mustang, his hands blackened with grease, his mind calm in the rhythmic patience of restoring a carburetor. He isn't blasting music, isn't running power saws, just a podcast murmuring about ancient Roman aqueducts, and historians still argue whether those marvels collapsed from poor maintenance or plain hubris. Either way, the point is it was quiet, too quiet to warrant what happened next. Red and blue lights wash across the garage walls, harsh and sudden. Two cruisers slide to a stop outside like they're arriving at a bank heist. Arthur instinctively drops his screwdriver, walks out with his palms half raised. A young officer calls for him to stay put while his partner listens to a frantic woman in a pink velour tracksuit. Carol Miller, the HOA president, the neighborhood's self-styled queen, waves her arms like she's auditioning for a Broadway disaster scene. "Sir, we got reports of loud machinery, maybe even a chop shop," the officer explains, peering suspiciously past Arthur into the tidy garage where a single light bulb glows over polished chrome. Arthur almost laughs. "Officer, the loudest thing in there is a historian arguing about Julius Caesar's handwriting." A beat of silence, then the officer smirks, realizes the absurdity, and nods. His partner mutters something about déjà vu. Apparently, Carol's nuisance calls aren't rare. They apologize, drive off, leaving behind an air that smells faintly of ozone and wasted taxpayer dollars. But Carol isn't finished. She stomps up the driveway, clipboard in hand like it's Excalibur. "The bylaws are clear," she hisses. "No commercial activity, no noise after 10. You will learn to respect the rules." Arthur wipes his hands on a rag, staring at her with the kind of calm that's more dangerous than shouting. He sees it clearly now. This wasn't about a trash can left out or a whimsical gargoyle statue. This was about a woman drunk on power, the kind of petty tyrant who believed fear was stronger than fairness. He watches her retreat under the rigid glow of HOA-approved streetlights, her silhouette smug against the dark. That's when something inside Arthur shifts. The quiet retiree who wanted peace is gone. The investigator trained to dismantle fraud, to pick apart conspiracies, thread by thread, that man has just clocked back in, and Carol has no idea what she's unleashed. Arthur wakes the next morning with that quiet, cold clarity, the kind you only feel when the game has changed. Oakwood Preserve, with its manicured lawns and ruler-measured grass, suddenly feels like a stage set, and behind the curtain he suspects rot. Carol's 911 stunt wasn't just petty, it was protective. He recognizes the pattern from years of chasing bad actors who hid behind paperwork. People who weaponize rules often have something to lose. So he begins where he always does the records. The HOA bylaws, written like a medieval charter, contain a gem in Article 3. Any homeowner can petition for access to financials. Carol counts on neighbors being too busy, too tired, or too intimidated to ever try. Arthur isn't most neighbors. He drafts a certified request citing the exact statute line by line. When their attorney responds with a pompous letter about his harassment, he almost laughs. It's the equivalent of bringing a plastic butter knife to a sword fight. He pens a reply so tight it could double as a case study in law school, even dropping precedent that legal scholars still argue over whether it narrowed or expanded homeowner rights. Within 48 hours, Gary the treasurer is on the phone, his voice quivering like a canary in a coal mine. "Mr. Wells, of course you can see the files, just a misunderstanding." Arthur shows up at the clubhouse 2 days later, greeted by cardboard boxes stacked like fortresses of guilt. 8 hours he spends sifting through paper bank statements, invoices, meeting minutes typed with Brenda's furious pen. And that's when the patterns emerge. One company keeps showing up: Prestige Community Solutions LLC, landscaping, pool chemicals, even the violation notice printing. They rake in huge contracts, all at inflated prices. Arthur cross-references filings, traces the registration back to a residential address, and the puzzle clicks. The owner, Frank Miller, Carol's brother. Her empire of lavender notices and pastel finds isn't about community aesthetics. It's about funneling hundreds of thousands of HOA dues straight into her family's pockets. But the money is just the surface. As he digs deeper, a darker thread winds through the paperwork. Families with children consistently denied rentals for flimsy reasons. An elderly widow refused a wheelchair ramp because it would ruin cohesion. Each rejection letter is another piece of evidence, another glimpse into discrimination so calculated it makes his stomach turn. Arthur doesn't need to imagine motives. He sees them written in Carol's neat pen strokes. She isn't just lining her pockets. She's curating her kingdom-shaping Oakwood Preserve into a sterile dollhouse community that reflects her biases. To her kids, our noise ramps are eyesores and rules are weapons. To Arthur, this is gold federal law. Gold. The Fair Housing Act isn't just a suggestion, it's his specialty. And Carol, in her arrogance, has walked straight into his jurisdiction. By the time he closes the last box, the fluorescent lights hum like victory drums. The gargoyle in his flower bed, the trash can ticket, the midnight police call, they all make sense now. Carol's petty tyranny is the mask. Fraud and discrimination are the face. And Arthur, with his spreadsheets and his badge waiting quietly in the drawer, is about to pull the whole mask off in front of everyone. The notice goes out: a special HOA meeting forced by Arthur's petition, scheduled in the beige-tiled clubhouse that usually smells of weak coffee and chlorine from the community pool. Carol tries to spin it, describing it as the work of a small but vocal minority. But her smug tone only makes the crowd curious. By the time Arthur arrives in a plain suit, binder in hand, nearly every household has shown up. It feels less like a meeting and more like opening night at a courtroom drama. Carol sits at the raised table, flanked by Gary and Brenda, her power suit pressed into stiff lines. She expects a rant about lawn ornaments. Instead, Arthur cues up a projector. Slide after slide fills the wall: $5,000 invoices for flowers, shell company registrations, in her brother's name, kickbacks disguised as maintenance. At first the crowd murmurs, then they shout. Questions pierce the air. Is this true? Where's the money? Carol's face turns chalk white. Arthur doesn't let up. He pivots to the housing discrimination: every family with kids denied, every flimsy excuse highlighted. He reads aloud Mrs. Gable's ramp denial, and the widow dabs her eyes in the crowd while neighbors glare at Carol with fresh disgust. Parents grip their children's shoulders tighter. Carol screeches, lies into the microphone, her voice cracking like glass. But her loyalists are gone. Even Gary looks like he might faint. She tries to adjourn the meeting, declaring Arthur a menace, fumbling for her phone to call the cops again. And that's when two uniformed officers step forward. Carol beams for a split second until Arthur slides his wallet open, the gold HUD badge glinting under fluorescent lights. The silence is thunderous. "Ma'am," Arthur says, his voice even but heavy. "My name is Arthur Wells, senior investigator with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is no longer an HOA issue. It is a federal matter involving fraud, embezzlement, and repeated fair housing violations." Gasps ripple across the room. Carol stumbles back, her power suit suddenly a costume too big for her frame. Tears spill loud and ugly as her kingdom collapses in real time. The sergeant shifts his stance, now watching her, not him. Arthur continues outlining how every document, every invoice, every denial letter will be part of a report already in motion. Carol sobs. Brenda sits frozen. Gary wrings his hands, muttering excuses. The residents, freed from fear, surge with fury and relief. One shouts, "Keeping the neighborhood nice by stealing from us." Another adds by trying to drive out families. The spell is broken. In the weeks that follow, Carol resigns in disgrace. Her brother indicted, her lawyer sanctioned. The HOA's accounts are frozen. A forensic audit reveals over 500,000 siphoned away, and HUD slaps fines so heavy Carol must sell her home. The new board apologizes to Mrs. Gable by funding her ramp, rewrites the bylaws to require transparency, and posts all finances online. The neighborhood changes. Children of the Patel family finally able to rent chase each other on the green, their laughter carrying like a hymn of renewal. Arthur doesn't run for office, doesn't seek thanks. He returns the gargoyle to his flower bed, listens to the Mustang's engine purr, and enjoys the rarest sound of all, peace. He knows tyrants thrive on silence, on neighbors too weary to resist. But he's proved what happens when one person stands methodically against them. Empires of fear crumble, and now the pacing slows, words stretching softer. The streets of Oakwood Preserve no longer feel policed by rulers with clipboards, but alive with neighbors unafraid. Imagine the quiet relief in Mrs. Gable's eyes as she rolls down her new ramp, or the soft dusk light catching children's laughter across lawns once muted by fear. Arthur fades back into his evenings of tools and podcasts, the world outside less noisy, more humane. Justice, he knows, doesn't always arrive with a gavel's strike. Sometimes it's the subtle click of a binder closing, or the whisper of a badge catching light just long enough to remind a room that fairness still has teeth. So tonight, as you drift toward rest, let that image settle in your mind. A neighborhood freed from tyranny, a man's quiet watch ending in peace, and the calm promise that even in small places, fairness can bloom again. Breathe easy, let your shoulders sink, and let the gentle thought carry you into sleep. The fight is over, the streets are calm, and tomorrow will sound like laughter.